Hi, I hope you all are doing good. Today we are going to completely discuss about contract testing. Now, before we understand what is contract testing, why testing, we need to find something that is not available with all the testing methodologies and scenarios and the way to implement that we know so far, like unit testing, integration testing, end-to-end testing, and so many things that we have. We'll try to find out what is it that those things are not providing and what is the need of finding for something else. And that's how we are going to understand the need and what is contract testing. And then today we are going to do the demo of contract testing using Spring Boot. So whatever we are going to discuss is generic to all the frameworks, but coming to the implementation demo part, I'm going to use Spring Boot Java. Okay, now the GitHub link, code base, everything I'll put it in the description, and timestamps also you can find in the comment section. So based on that, you can jump on to the topic that you need, and with that mentioned, let's get started. So this is the readme file that I am referring. I'll scroll to the very bottom and we'll start with unit testing. So what is unit testing? We'll write a piece of logic which has no dependency on anything else, but it is completely focused on a specific function, a specific module that we are writing. Okay, and we are going to write the test for a specific pieces of line, so it does not have to do any kind of setup, any logics, nothing, just focus on that individual piece of code. Okay, now this is so fast, so quick, and it is going to, of course, going to help us with any kind of breaking change that it is going to find out in the development phase itself. So all this can be done with the unit testing. So then what is the loophole with the unit testing? One, because it is limited to that piece of block, so it is not going to frame a real-time scenario and give us the breaking issues. And second thing, whatever we are writing as part of this test case, we are going to use only the mock data, right? So it could be that there is a big scope that it will not be finding out the whole set of breaking changes. It has the ability only to find the minimal possible breakable changes which is relevant to that piece of code. Okay, now if there is any dependency with the other functions and everything is mocked. Okay, but whatever we need as part of that function, that unit testing is helping us. So going one step ahead, we have integration testing, right? So let's say a monolithic application or a microservice or whatever it is dependent on multiple components. Few will be its internal components, few will be external components, few will be some other team's application, few will be our own team's application. Like even the applications can be internal and external, right? Few can be managed by us, few can be managed by someone else. So as part of integration testing, we are if I compare the next one, that is end-to-end integration testing and integration testing. So when we say end-to-end testing, all the teams that are involved in the complete flow will be there. Now let's say integration testing, whatever the database we are using, let's say we are using some Confluent, Kafka, we are using S3 bucket, and so with all these things in place, we can easily do the integration testing, right? Now when we say easily, it's a tedious task. Okay, and you have to operate end to end to find out all the scenarios that you are doing. So you have to do the scenarios testing every time. You have to if there is any update in any of the components, you need to update your integration testing accordingly. Now it is a time taking thing. Okay, and if there is any change that you did, okay, but as part of the testing your changes are fine, but someone else is messing up something. Okay, now because of that, your integration testing, which is what the expectation of integration testing, but the setup is complex, it is a time taking, it is tedious, and doing this every time is not feasible. Okay, and that's how integration testing is helping us and providing us with few of the loopholes that we have to a little bit of amount of communications is involved. So integration testing is good, it is actually testing, but the only loopholes is you have to do the tedious tasks, you have to spend ample amount of time to do the setup. It is time taking, and there are 100 scenarios, you cannot do 100 scenarios at every point of time. Okay, and if there is any component changing, you have to update your integration testing. These are all the things that we have to do. This is fine. Okay, so we are getting what we need from integration testing, and we need to do all these things. So that is what integration testing. And Similarly, end-to-end testing, all the teams are involved. Okay, and the same loopholes that we have in integration testing, the same we have in end-to-end testing. Okay, that is the everyone should be up, everyone should be ready, everyone should say green signal, only then this testing can be started. Okay, and it's a time taking thing, but of course it is going to simulate the real time, so it is having its own advantages based on some provided conditions and things that we need to do. Now next thing is contract testing. So before we understand this, let's take a scenario that I am using an API developed by you. Okay, you have developed an API which is used by multiple clients. So two things: provider, let's say you have developed an API which is going to be used by 10 different applications. Okay, let's say you are Google, you have developed a map API, and I am one of the 1,000 clients which is going to use your API to create one more app or something. Okay, now your API is consumed by me and your API is consumed by 1,000 others. So as a provider, if you do any changes to your API, you need to know who all are the consumers of a particular API, and if you do a specific changes in your application, who all among the 1,000 clients are getting impacted. I hope this piece is very clear. Two pieces. Okay, I'm just giving a sample example. You are Google Map provider. Okay, you have exposed an API. You have 1,000 different consumers. I am one of the consumer. Consumer means some application which is using your API, right? So if you are doing some changes, do you need to inform 1,000 people? You need not. You need to inform only to the people who is going to be impacted because of your change. If you are sending other, that's fine, but that is called spamming, which is not good. So you should impact those who are going to be impacted with your changes. You should be aware of that. Okay, and even as a consumer, when I am changing something, I should also get to know, okay, providers is having the API in this manner. Now we both are in a meeting, we discussed, okay, what is contract, okay, what, how your API is going to work. I went through your documentation, you told me if you want this behavior, use this, if you want this behavior, use this API. I understood, meeting is done, we'll jump onto the development piece. But once I develop the piece based on the meetings, communication and documents, I can still not assure that my understanding of how the behavior the API is going to work is same as what you are expecting me to understand, right? So that is the reason, this is the reason. One thing is that to be on the same page. Second thing, to identify who all are consuming or using your APIs. Third, if you are doing any changes, who are going to be impacted. And if you, even if you are not doing any changes, everyone should be on the same page. So all these are the reasons why we have contract testing. Okay, I still did not explain what is contract testing, so we hold on that for a minute. But these are some of the loopholes that we need to cover up, because of which contract testing came. Okay, so we are going to see how to test step by step everything, instructions, keywords, everything we are going to see. But for now, there are two pieces involved: provider, consumer. You understood? Okay, now let's say you explained me everything. Okay, now I started developing. Who are you? You are a provider of Google Maps. I am the consumer, a user of a Google Maps. I developed the API. I have done with my code changes. But before I deliver, I need to write a contract. I need to write few interactions in the form, let's say, unit test case only. Okay. Now, but if I write it following a framework, following a methodology, following the contract testing approach, the end goal, the output is a JSON file. This JSON file is called contract. Let's jump onto the diagram and let's see what is it. Okay, so we are going to see what is the advantages of all in a minute, but let's jump onto this. Okay, as a consumer, I'm simply writing the interaction. You can see the first step, I'm going to write some interaction. So in a simple voice interactions, you can say, if this is the request, the provider should give me this response. If I send the request to, the provider should give me the response to. So those are the interactions that I'm writing in the English statements. Okay, and once the interactions are done, I'm going to write the unit test case. Okay, the second step. Okay, and in the unit test case, I'm going to make a call to the API, assuming that the call will go to the actual provider. That is, assuming that when I do the call, it is going to the Google, to make the call to the Google Maps API. But Here I am writing one more pack mock provider. So here again the mock is coming. What is this mock? This mock is to replicate the actual Google, so that when I as a consumer, second step, I am trying to call and passing the actual request to this mock provider, which is replicating Google. The request is going to go to the interactions defined by me only. Me in the sense defined by the consumer only. And based on the interaction, the mock service of the Google Maps is going to give me the response. And in the unit test case, as you know, at the end I'm going to write the assertions. So straightforward, first I'm going to write the interactions, assuming that this is the behavior of the API. When I pass request one body one, this is the response. When I pass the same request with some different body, this is the response. When I pass a different API call, this is the, so all that interactions I'm going to write, and then I'm going to call that via my unit test case, and the API call is going to go to this pack mock provider, which is nothing but a replication of your Google Maps. And then based on the interaction that I've written previously, it is going to give me the response, and based on that response I'm going to write the assertion in my unit test case. If you understood, perfect. If you didn't understood, just hold on a minute. I am sure after 10 to 15 minutes max, when we'll jump onto the code base, we'll be able to clearly correlate what we discussed conceptually versus what we are writing. Okay. Now, what is the use of all this? It's all with me only, right? How the Google will know what I am doing, right? You agree with that? So what is the output of all this flow is a JSON file is going to be generated. Okay. Now this JSON file I'm going to give it to whom? Provider. Who is the provider in case of our example? It's Google Maps, or we can say Google, who has exposed Google Maps API. So what Google is going to do is, it is going to simply have these three steps. Okay, so what is it? Interaction. So what is the interaction? You can see this interaction is already provided by the consumer. So can I say that this interaction and this mock consumer is nothing but, when we are doing consumer testing, we had pack mock provider. Pack mock provider, you can maybe add it as a synonym and try to understand it as a simulation of a provider. Okay, now coming to the provider is already having his code. So what is he going to do? He is going to simulate the consumer. So the provider has interaction, the provider has the packmark consumer, and then provider is going to make use of all these three to validate. Let me rephrase it a bit. I generated a JSON file as a consumer. Provider is simply going to take that JSON file and going to run that contract. So when we say the provider is going to run that contract, means the Google is going to run that contract, and as part of the contract, the API call will be made by the contract testing libraries. Okay, based on the JSON that we have given. Now as soon as, because of that contract content or JSON content, the contract testing will know that this is the API call that I need to do, because this is what the contract and this is what the consumer is expecting. Let's hit that. So when provider say start contract testing, the contract testing is going to make an API call on behalf of the consumer, simulating the behavior of the JSON or contract. Okay, and it is going to, okay, so if I see this figure, okay, these two, interaction and packed mock consumer, is going to make a call to the actual provider, and the response that it is going to get, the expected request, it is going to compare with the response. So let's follow the diagram once again. Okay, so there is different states that I'm writing as part of the contract. I'll show you what is state and everything in a minute. Just we'll hold on for 2 more minutes. Okay, so let's say as part of the request, there is 5 requests that we need to test. So first expected request, it is going to make an API call. Okay, so that is sent to the provider. Now as soon as the provider is getting it, it is going to send the actual response. It means the request came from the simulating contract to the provider, and provider is up and running. It is going to give back the response. Now this response is going to be compared with the expected response. So the request came for the contract, went to the provider gave the response, which is the actual response. Now that actual response is going to be compared with the response that we have it in the JSON. Straightforward, no confusion. Okay, as a consumer, I created the JSON where I'm telling this is the request, this is the response, this is my expectation, this is my understanding. Okay, I gave you that contract as a because you are my provider. Now you simply executed that contract once again in your application. Now if the test is successful, means what? The contract that my consumer is expecting and the provider is expecting is same. Both are on the same page. Both are assuming the behavior correctly and similarly. Okay, but if the build is failing, not build, I mean the test is failing, it means that there is some differences, that what they are expecting versus what is actually happening by the provider API is different. So that's how the contract testing is going to help us. Okay, now here is one more thing that I mentioned. The file that is generated by the consumer will be given to the provider. So if I'm doing this manually now, this is a very traditional approach. So what is happening here is, this is where the packed broker, packed flow is coming into picture. So I'm going to so it's a straightforward thing. The JSON that is generated by the consumer will be kept on some common platform. Okay, later when the provider wants to run the contract testing, he will get the latest JSON file that is uploaded by the consumer and is going to run the test as part of their continuous integration, continuous deployment. Here of course that testing will be part of continuous integration. I hope you understood the concept. Any questions conceptually so far, you can please mention in the comment section. So with that mentioned, you can come to this UI, I mean this URL, and see the documentation of what is contract testing and everything, and you can put that in the comment section. So we'll just give it a read, that when we are doing the contract testing, the advantages is, you as a consumer, you are not depending on the provider. Okay, so you are running in isolation. So it is so speed because you are not dependent. Okay, every time you run a build, you can simply start this. You need not to make anything up, any dependent component up. It's simply isolated. Okay, and because of that, the speed, accuracy and everything. And I think, yeah, these are self-explanatory, will not spend much time on it. So with that mention, let me jump onto the coding base. Okay, the complete code is present here. First, let me explain you what is it that I'm doing in the code. Okay, so I'm simply creating a consumer Spring Boot application, a producer Spring Boot application. Now, usually when you see some this kind of modules, you assume that it is going to have a common parent and that's how it is running. But I want to simulate a real-time use case, right? So because of that, consider this as a separate application, this as a separate application. Okay, so I'm going to next open the IntelliJ and I'll show you the package structure. So first, let's see the basic skeleton. I'll start with the producer, and the producer is here. Okay, so I simply have a main. Okay, and it is using H2 database. So if you want to know, did I wrote everything from the core? No, you can simply, I've added this initializer also. So contract testing producer. So if I open producer, you can no, one second. So I've added a Spring initializer. Yeah, consumer Spring initializer. So if you open this image, you can find what all to select, and you can select these dependencies, and based on that you can start, or you can clone from my repo itself. Okay, all right, let's jump onto the producer. I simply have I simply have in resources data.sql, and there I'm saying create a table and insert the 3 records. Straightforward. Let me zoom the font a bit. Okay, so I am simply writing the SQL to create the table called employees, and I'm inserting 3 records. Straightforward, right? So as soon as I start the application, because of my application YML, it is going to create the queries, run the queries, and I'm saying that you need to initialize always, so it is going to create the queries, okay, in the H2 database, and it is going to run on server 9001. This is where you can see the DB UI, and yeah, that's all we need. So I'll close this, and as usual, so I'm defining the employee class in the entity by having these attributes. Of course, you can remove all this and just write getters and setters. Yeah, this all I can remove and write getters and setters. Overall, I'm not touching the code base as of now. The employee have the ID, first name, last name, okay, and the email, of course. So that is entity, and then I have a repository to perform any DB operations for the employee, that is also straightforward. So we'll have the entity, we have the repository, and then I'm writing a very straightforward logic, a method in which I'm going to call repository.findAll to get me all the employees. Any queries so far? I don't think so, right? If you have, you can put in the comment section. And later I'm calling this method of the service in my controller. Okay, so you can see if you hit /API/employees, you can simply get all the employees that are there in the database. So I'm starting it just to showcase the response, and I've added few more things. What are those? So if I go to pom.xml, you can see Swagger. This is no, there is a different name for it. Yeah, it's not Swagger actually. This is what I have added, and let's see. Yeah, this is not the application, this is the application, and I'm going to start the application. So I see that it's running on 9001. Let me open that, and local host 9001 Swagger, and here I can see the Swagger. Okay, so simply go to employee control, click on get, and try it out, execute, and you can see the response that we are getting is from the database. Okay, let me zoom in a bit as well. Okay, this is the response that we are getting. So I hope there's no this thing so far. Okay, so this is the whole provider, and coming to the consumer. Okay, in consumer I'm simply having source main Java. In this Java, okay, in resource I'm just giving that it should run on 9002, and my the application URL is going to be 9001. Okay, to which I need to call. So the consumer is running on 9002, the provider is running on 9001. Okay, so I have a service, and in the service I'm simply creating a REST template and making an API call. Okay, remaining all is just for our utility purpose. But yeah, this is the core logic. We are simply going to make use of Google Maps API, which I was talking about the example. So here we are calling the API/employees, and that's all we are calling. So now what is contract testing? So not what is contract. Step for implementing contract testing here is we simply go to pom.xml, and if you scroll down, we can see that this is the whole dependency that we need for the libraries that we need for contract testing, and this is one plugin. Okay, so these two things we need to add in the pom.xml, and we'll close everything. We don't need all these things. We'll jump onto the test, and the only thing that I'm going to write is this class. So I'll minimize everything. This is the class that I'm creating, and these are the few annotations that I need to write. So here I'm going to say provider name, like the provider whom I want to test, and below when I'm writing testing, I'm going to write the consumer name also. So the consumer for which I'm testing. So we'll discuss more about it when we have multiple providers, multiple consumers. But as of now, we have only one consumer, that is test consumer, and only one provider, that is test provider. Okay, now and host interface. So what is this host interface and all these things? So if you see, while we were discussing about the flow, and if I go back to the diagram, as part of the testing I need to provide one mock provider which will have the interactions, right? So I'm saying that that mock will run on localhost 80, not 80, localhost, which what we'll see. But the interaction I'm going to write using @packed. So here I'm saying, given this test get, upon receiving get request, the path is packed, method is get, respond with 200 with this header and this body. Okay, but if you give me the post request, okay, so what is the content that I'm filling up here is the state. Okay, so again I'm defining, if you are sending me the post request which is having this as header, this as body, and this as the path, you give me this as a response. Okay, now this piece of code, right, it has nothing to do with employees, right? Just hold on for a minute. So this is the code base which is for one more API. So if I go to provider, I have employee controller, I have pack controller. Okay, now in the pack controller also I have /packed for get, /packed for post. Okay, now this piece of code I copied from a different repository which I was referring in between. Now I kept this code as it is so that I can have multiple controllers, and I want to show how to write multiple interactions in the contract testing. So for that reason, here I am writing the first piece of interaction which is having two sub interactions: given this, do this; given this, do this. And then I'm writing test for it, that when I'm testing, you use this packed method. So you can see create packed, and I'm here saying use that one and make an API call. So here I'm making an API call, here I'm doing the assertion. Okay, so this method we are good, and this method also we are good. Okay, so first I wrote this group of interaction for a specific list of packed controller, and then I wrote the test cases where you can see the annotation at the rate test and at the rate pack test, where I need to give what is the interaction name. Okay, similarly I'm going to write one more group of interaction, which is I'm going to say create packed for employee. So this I'm writing for the controller, for the employee controller, where I am saying if this is the path. Okay, this content is a state. What is the use of this state? Give me one more minute. Okay, so here I'm saying that if given this piece of this thing, you respond me with these three records. Okay, straightforward. This is one more interaction. Now if I minimize it, you can see now I'm writing a test given this thing. So here I'm saying that the interaction whose name is create pack for employee, use that interaction and then run this test case. In this test case, I'm simply saying again REST template, call this endpoint and do the assertion on the body. Okay, now because there are three records, I can do the assertion. So there is no knowledge required how to write the assertion, because it is similar to how we write in the unit test case. Okay, but this is the whole what we're writing, the interaction and writing the test case, interaction and writing the test case. So based on all the process that is happening here, okay, now based on that, if I try to run this, okay, maven test, let's see what will happen. Now meanwhile it is running, let me show you one more thing. Okay, so let's say here I'm saying that when I do /API/employee, you give me this first name as Michael. Okay, similarly when I am running, I am checking here first name contains this or not. If not, again it will fail, and the same will be reflected for the provider also. But overall, that is one thing. Second thing, okay, it failed for some reason. Let me check what is the reason on that. But yeah, now the second thing is when it will give me this response only when the path, the method, the complete request is matched, right? So if I write here one, okay, and here I'm saying /employees, okay, now this is not going to match the request that we have in the interaction, right? So because the request is not matched, so what is the response you'll get? You'll get nothing, right? But here you are asserting on the response. So what has happened? The build is going to be failed. The test is going to be failed, which is the expected. Now let me see what is this issue. So I think it has some source target issue. Yeah, let me remove this piece and I'll scroll up. Okay, just make sure you have all these three plugins in place, and there are many configurations that it provides us, but if you need, you can add them. But for me, I don't think I need it that much, so I didn't keep it. Let me run the test once again. So I'm using Java 11, but the source and target was 16, so that was the cause. Let's see once again. So as part of the target, there is classes, these three files. Now the default place where this contract is going to be stored in a folder called packs. Now if you want to modify that, again you can just modify it in the plugins. Okay, so we can see looking for packed, and okay, it is making a call and it is comparing, giving the response and doing everything. Now let's see, it executed two tests, perfect. And let me reload this. Yeah, okay, so if I expand this packed, this is the JSON that is generated. If I open it, and we can see whatever happened so far is generated in form of JSON. Okay, sometimes we can understand, sometimes we don't, because it's going to be added more and more nested based on what is it that we are writing in the test case. So I'll copy this and I'll go to my provider, and in the provider I can put it anywhere. Okay, because I'm not using CI, that is continuation integration, but doing it manually, I'm doing this. Otherwise we can configure it in our Jenkins or pipeline or whatever we are using. So here I am going to minimize this complete thing. I don't need all these things. I'm simply going to close. I'm opening test, I'm opening resources, and I created a directory called packs. In that I pasted this JSON. Okay, now this JSON is going to act as what? So this JSON is going to act as this first two items that are there in the image. Okay, now because of this and the annotations that we are going to write now, because of that contract and these annotations, it is going to do the contract testing for the provider. Now how we are going to do this testing in the provider, we'll see. So that is the all change that we need to do, and then we'll go to Java and simply create one file. Again, this I'm referring from Baildong, so that's why I kept the naming as it is, and I'm going to give credit to them as well in the description, because their page is very informative. I used that and I added few more use cases like employees and others. So that's why their code also I'm keeping as it is. On top of that, whatever I'm writing, I'm showing you. Okay, let me show this again. Okay, so here what I'm writing is @provider @packed folder. So in the packed folder I'm saying what is that location where you can find the contract. Okay, so I said in so test resources you can find it, and before starting anything, you have to run the application, right? Only if you run the application, the contract is going to hit the provider. So because of that, we are starting our application, and before each method it needs to make sure that the start is fine or not. Okay, and here the context you can set many things, just like we do the code updates or application configuration updates in our application properties. You can do here also, like setting the base path, okay, setting the common endpoint and all such. Okay, for me there was no such requirement, so I kept it like this. Now I have written localhost. You will think if I'm going to do this in the CI, then in that case how I'm going to put it. So you can just simply take it from the application YML. Okay, key value pairs and all such things you can do. Alright, now this is going to be remain intact. This is where we are going to trigger each state, or we are going to trigger each request. So here I'm saying trigger the state called a test get. Okay, now where is the state present? It is present in the contractor. So if I go here, you can see this is the first interaction happening. Okay, so I can see there are overall 3 interactions. So we are going to go for the, let's say, get request for employee. So I'm opening the first one here. If you see in the first interaction, there will be a state attribute. Let me see where it is. It should be on within the interaction state response. Okay, this response, let's minimize. See, provided state test get employees. Okay, so I'm going to trigger it by simply saying @state trigger this endpoint. Now it is there in JSON. So why it is there in JSON? Who did the input? If we give a look back to our consumer while writing the test case, you have mentioned that given this as a state value, upon receiving this is the response. Similarly, we have said given this is the state, you match this request, this is the response. So that's how the contract is generated, and using @state in our live test we are triggering each of them. So I'll put the Baildung link also that I referred. I'll put the images link also from which I referred and copied, because this diagram is not mine, but this is very nice. It is like very neatly explained, so that's the reason I kept it here. I hope this is clear so far. Now we have few more types of testing that we can do in the Spring Boot and other frameworks, of course, which are covering the different set of requirement and loopholes of these testings that we have seen so far. So we'll try to add that more in the playlist. So stay tuned. If you like the content, do subscribe, share. You can follow me on the Instagram page, I'll put it on the handle, and you can follow me on Facebook page, Discord. If you want to discuss more, you can connect me with mail, and all the links that I've shared in the about section. But for now, if you have any queries, put it in the comment section, and stay tuned for more different types of testing in Spring Boot. And apart from this, you can see in the playlist we are working on various dimensions of the topic. So if you are interested in anything, do follow. And if you have any suggestion on any other topics, mention that also in the comment section. With that mention, signing off. Stay tuned. Thank you.